Well, it appears like we are approaching the end of COVID-19 pandemic. As case numbers continue dropping, the world has started getting back to normal. Businesses, restaurants, schools, even churches are making a comeback. But as one pandemic appears to be ending, we are seeing the emergence of what some experts are calling a second pandemic that is worse than the first. And it's one that we as a team are very concerned about. Now, this pandemic is not a virus that causes flu-like symptoms. Instead, the new crisis we are facing is a mental health crisis. According to a recent study, about 1 in 5 Americans suffered from some sort of mental illness before the pandemic, and that number is now 2 in 5. Michelle Williams, the dean of the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, stated, "This past year has been terribly damaging to our collective mental health. There is no vaccine for mental health. It will be months, if not years, before we are fully able to grasp the scope of the mental health issues born out of this pandemic. Long after we've gained control of the virus, the mental health repercussions will likely continue to reverberate." Church, this is something that we have to talk about. Have you ever been in a season where it feels like anything and everything is going wrong? When the phone rings or the email notification sounds, you're afraid it's going to be more bad news. You worry that one morning you're just going to crash and not be able to get out of the bed. You're weighed down with worry and fear. You wonder what's next, what else could possibly go wrong. You're exhausted from the anxiety and the stress. It doesn't matter what you do, you're always tired. And you wonder if it's ever going to end. If your situation is ever going to turn around. If your situation is ever going to get better. And it seems like Satan is attacking every day on every front. Difficult and unexpected circumstances happen. Discouragement is part of life. Things don't and won't always go your way. But discouragement is usually temporary. Something else comes along and your spirits are lifted. But what I'm talking about is something different. Not just discouragement, but depression. Depression, deep discouragement that leads you to believe it's not getting better and it will never get better. Parents, this is my number one concern for students. While mental health was a growing problem in children and adolescents pre-pandemic, the pandemic has amplified this situation. Rates of suicidal thinking and behavior were up by 25% or more from similar periods in 2019. Through most of 2020, the proportion of pediatric emergency admissions for mental problems like panic and anxiety was up by 24% for young children and 31% for adolescents compared to the year before. And this stat is alarming and it's frightening. According to the National Institute of Mental Health, suicide is the second leading cause of death among 10 to 24-year-olds. Gone are the days where you can just brush it off as a phase that your kid is going through. This is serious. Check on your kids. Check on your students often. Make sure that they are doing okay mentally. And if they aren't, get help. Having a kid who is struggling with depression or mental health is not a sign of bad parenting, and you should not be embarrassed. We have to work together to protect our kids and keep them safe. And if you're currently struggling with depression, I want to make sure you understand it's not a sin to be depressed. Dealing with depression does not make you a bad Christian or a bad person. In fact, some of our pastoral staff have struggled with depression. Depression can be caused by chemical imbalances and other medical conditions, and I absolutely agree with medication to treat that. Medication to get your body healthy and balanced is often necessary, but I'm not talking about medical causes of depression because I'm not a doctor. Instead, I want to talk to you about when life gets you down and you find yourself battling discouragement and depression. One of the most famous men in the entire Old Testament was a prophet named Elijah. Elijah was a man of great faith who was used by God to do amazing and miraculous things. But this is not the story of an incredible miracle. Instead, this is a close look at the lowest point in Elijah's life. Let me set it up for you. Elijah won a huge victory over the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel in a showdown to determine who was the one true God. It's an awesome story found in the 18th chapter of 1 Kings, and I highly recommend you read the full story later, but here's a really short version. 2 altars were set up, each with a sacrifice, and whichever God was real would send fire from heaven and consume the sacrifice. So the prophets of Baal went first. They yelled, they screamed, they cut themselves, they cried, but Baal never showed up, no fire. And then in the ultimate in-your-face moment, when they were done, Elijah poured water on his sacrifice, prayed a simple prayer to God, and instantly fire from heaven burned up the sacrifice. It was awesome. When all the people saw this, they fell prostrate and cried, "The Lord, He is God. The Lord, He is God." It was a time of spiritual awakening in a nation that had turned their back on God. And then Elijah prayed and God sent rain, ending a long drought. It was another amazing moment. Elijah was the man. He was famous. He was popular. But there was one person who didn't like Elijah. Jezebel, the wicked queen, was angry and jealous. And Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them." In other words, I'm coming for you and I'm going to kill you if it's the last thing that I do. And when you read this story, you think Elijah should have gotten a palace. He should have gotten a promotion. After all, he defeated Baal. His God made it rain. But instead, Elijah got a death threat from a queen. It was wrong. It was unfair. And it was completely not what he expected. And like Elijah, you get depressed when things don't go the way you expect. You expected a raise, but instead you got laid off. You expected to make a nice profit, but instead you lost money. You expected health, but instead you got sickness. You expected to get ahead, but instead you ended up falling behind. This is one of the main things we talk about in premarital counseling, expectations versus reality, because it's the reason a lot of marriages fail. You expected your kid to get a scholarship and a college degree. Instead, they dropped out of high school and can't get a job. You expected your parents to stay married forever, and instead, they divorced, and now you're stuck in the middle. You expected to have children, but you haven't been able to get pregnant. You expected to retire comfortably, but your retirement account was wiped out. You expected to be sober the rest of your life, but now you've relapsed. That difference between expectation and reality becomes a source of discouragement. And this is where a lot of people lose their faith. And so what did God's man of faith and power do? Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Now, Elijah had just defeated an entire group of Baal prophets, but he was afraid of one angry old lady. One evil queen caused Elijah to forget about God and his strength and decide that he was on his own. So Elijah took off running. And sometimes, when things go wrong, you forget the strength and the power of the God that we serve. You think that you have to come up with the answer. You get depressed when you forget the power of God and instead try to handle things on your own. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there. If Elijah kept his servant around, his servant might have said, "Hey, Elijah, snap out of it, man. Don't you remember all those dead Baal prophets? Remember fire from heaven? Surely we can handle one old lady. Come on, God's on our side. We can do this." But Elijah didn't hear that. In fact, he didn't hear any words of encouragement because he isolated himself. The same thing happens to you. When things start to go bad, you withdraw, and the people who could encourage you or challenge you are left behind. Sometimes it's not intentional. You're so caught up trying to fix your problems that you forget to allow others in. You may not intentionally remove yourself from the right people, but you don't intentionally surround yourself with the right people. You're so focused on your circumstances that you neglect your church family. It just seems like one more thing to deal with, one more thing on your plate. Other times you make the decision to isolate. I've heard it many times. I just haven't felt like being around people and coming to church because I'm struggling. Well, that's the very time you should be at church. Isolation feeds depression. When you are struggling with depression, the last thing you should do is withdraw from others. In fact, it's the worst thing you can do. So Elijah took off on his own. He left his servant while he himself went on a day's journey into the desert. And he came to a broom tree. He sat down under it and he prayed that he might die. I've had enough, Lord. It was a really, really low moment. Elijah, God's great prophet, was depressed and without hope. I'm tired. I just can't take it anymore. I've had enough. It seems like it's never going to quit. You get depressed when you're worn out, physically, mentally, or emotionally. It feels like you're in a hole and you're just trying to dig yourself out. But the more you shovel and the more you dig, the further you go down and the bigger the hole gets. And you find yourself thinking, I'm exhausted just thinking about this. It's too much. I can't take it anymore. Never seems to stop. And Elijah continued, take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. You get depressed when you compare yourself to others. And when you compare yourself to others, you have a tendency to compare your weaknesses to their strengths. And social media really feeds into this. You spend all day scrolling through people who have photoshopped every image and only show you the best moments of their life, most of which are made up. And that's not just famous people. Your friends are doing it too. You're doing it. Don't compare yourself to others. That's a trap that will only make you more depressed. And then he lay down under a tree and fell asleep. All at once, an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank, then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. The angel told Elijah, you cannot make it on your own. This road is too long, too difficult. You need help. You get depressed when you try to make it in your own strength. Paul wrote, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Acknowledge your weaknesses and receive God's strength. So Elijah got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night. From one meal, Elijah got enough strength to travel for 40 days. Wouldn't that be awesome? One trip to whole hog, one rack of ribs. Hallelujah. And you could, I'm so hungry, that looks so good. And you could travel for 40 days? That'd be amazing. Elijah traveled to the mountain of God, better known as Mount Sinai, which, by the way, if you're in trouble, pretty good place to run, the mountain of God. Elijah knew what had happened on this mountain. Mount Sinai is where God spoke to Moses out of the fire of a burning bush. Mount Sinai is where God gave the 10 Commandments and the law to Moses. This was God's mountain. But Elijah wasn't on a mission from God. In fact, it was the exact opposite. Elijah was off mission. He was running. Elijah took off because he was afraid of an angry, bitter, evil woman. And when Elijah got to Horeb, a holy place, instead of worshiping and thanking God, he found another place to hide, this time in a cave. And it's like Elijah completely forgot that God just gave him 40 days of strength from one meal. But that's what happens when you're depressed. You are so focused on yourself that you just can't see what God is doing. God is helping you. He is blessing you. You just aren't stopping to recognize it. If you could only see God's hand, his involvement, his protection, his blessing in your life. But in your depression, you miss God's blessings. And the word of the Lord came to him. What are you doing here, Elijah? And Elijah didn't really answer. Instead, he gave God a news report. He replied, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant. They've broken down your altars. They put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. And I feel bad for Elijah. He lost perspective. Look at my life, God. I did what you said. It didn't work out, and now they're trying to kill me. I'm the only one left. What are you going to do about it, God? Elijah wasn't thinking straight. I'm the only one left? Well, that's not true. Hello? Remember, this was right after fire from heaven. Everyone on the mountain declared their belief in the one true God. There were more people on Elijah's side now than ever before. But Elijah took off from his friends and all the people who were with him. He left everyone and then said, I'm the only one left. When you are in a deep valley and you feel all alone, you lose perspective. It's hard to get outside of your own world and see it from God's perspective. All you can see from your point of view are the things that are happening to you, the big, negative, terrible things. Sometimes it's easy to let those things block your view of God and what he's doing. Just like Elijah, you exaggerate the negative. Every mistake someone makes is an attack. Every time somebody forgets to say hello, it's because they hate you. And you say things like, nobody loves me. Everyone is against me. No one will go out with me again. Everyone in the whole church is talking about me. They have everything and I literally have nothing. That's a sign you're depressed. It also makes you more depressed. You know it's not true. You're just wallowing in self-pity, going from under a tree to hiding in a cave. And maybe that's where you find yourself today, in a cave of depression, and you feel like there's no way to recover. What do? How do you come back from there? And I believe that God would say to you, move over a few feet. Get out from under that tree. It's blocking your view. Take a few steps, walk outside of that cave and look up. I'm here. You are not alone. In Elijah's cave of depression, it's exactly what God did. God spoke to Elijah. The Lord said, go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by. Up until this point, Elijah was just running and hiding. He never stopped in the presence of God. And now God said, get out of the cave, I'm on my way. God told Elijah where to go, but you know where to go. When you're depressed, don't stay home isolated and alone. Go to church. Go to where God's presence can be felt. Go to your prayer room. Turn on your worship music. Fight depression by getting in the presence of God. And often, this one step is enough for me. I just have to get in the presence of God. And when I worship, the troubles and the worries of life diminish. Then a great and powerful wind tore through the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord. And Elijah had to think, wow, that must be God. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, there was an earthquake, and that's got to be God, right? But the Lord was not in the earthquake. After the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. It was an awesome display of power and force, better than any fireworks show you'd ever see. But God wasn't in the wind, he wasn't in the earthquake, and he wasn't in the fire. But after the fire came a gentle whisper. And if you grew up in church, you may have heard this gentle whisper described as a still, small voice. Because it's difficult to describe the sound of silence, translators say a whisper or a still voice. But after all the noise, there was the gentle sound of stillness. And that's where God was, in the silence, in the stillness. That's what got Elijah out of the cave, because he knew God was there. The silence brought Elijah out of his cave of despair. God spoke to Elijah. He said, even in the silence, I'm here. Elijah, you want me to show my power? I can do that. But I'm still God even when it doesn't look like it. I was present at the high of the fire of Mount Carmel, but I'm also here in the low, in the silence of Mount Sinai. I'm the God of the mountaintop, but I'm also the God of the valley. I'm here. I'm with you. You see, in the highs, we point to our great God, but in the lows, we tend to doubt that he's there. Especially in silence, we wonder, can God really be here? He is. You don't have to do anything. Just get in God's presence and be still. Calm down. Be quiet. Don't do anything. Just listen for God. Discover the voice and the presence of God in the stillness and in the silence. When Elijah heard it, he pulled his cloak over his face and he went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Finally, Elijah obeyed. If you want to overcome depression, obey God. Now, I know it seems too easy, but how will you ever escape your situation if you don't obey God? Do what he says. Obey his word. You may say, but I don't feel like it. When has trusting feelings ever been better than trusting God? Obey him. Obey his word. Now understand, if you're actively living in disobedience, expect your depression to continue. Because your disobedience distances you from the very thing that you need the most, God. And then a voice said to him, what are you doing here, Elijah? Same question as before, but this time the question came in a gentle whisper. Hey, Elijah, why are you still here? What are you doing? And he replied, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broke down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left. Now they're trying to kill me too. Elijah's depressed perspective caused him to believe this. His feelings were valid. That's how he was feeling, but God knew better. So God gave Elijah clear instructions on how to get back to who he was before, how to get back to thinking clearly, how to refocus. And the Lord said to him, go back the way you came. Go to the desert of Damascus, and when you get there, anoint Hazael, king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu, son of Nimshi, king over Israel, and anoint Elisha to succeed you as a prophet. God did not want Elijah to stay at Mount Sinai. It was time for him to go back and do what God had called him to do and what he was supposed to be doing. Lead Israel in revival, anoint kings and prophet. God said, Elijah, get up, get out of the cave. It's time to get back on track. You've been in this low long enough. If you stop here, you'll stay here. Elijah, go back to your assignment. The worst thing you can do is to quit on God when a low moment comes. Don't stop there, keep going. If you stop in the low, you'll stay in the low. And why would you want to stay there? When things are going wrong, that's the best time to be faithful and obedient to the Lord. When you're depressed, you drop out of everything. You retreat from everything bad, but you also retreat from everything good. Sure, Elijah ran from Jezebel, but he also ran from God's plan for his life. Don't make the same mistake. If you want to overcome depression, don't let the depression keep you from your assignment. Get back in the choir. Start teaching your class again. Get back in ministry. Return to your assignment. Am I saying act like everything's okay? No. But don't quit. Go back to doing what God has called you to do. God has a plan and a purpose for your life. It's time to get back to your assignment. Look again at verse 16. God said, anoint Elisha to succeed you as prophet. You know who Elisha turned out to be? He was Elijah's most faithful follower who stayed with him till the end. God said, enough feeling sorry for yourself. Elijah, it's time to invest in others. In depression, you are completely focused on yourself. You fight depression by investing in others. Work with kids or with students. Bring a bag of groceries each week for Share Your Lunch. Mentor kids and students at Metro. Help feed the homeless. Instead of focusing on yourself, invest in others. Love someone, believe in someone, invest in someone. Let God use you to make a difference. And then God finished with a reality check for Elijah. He said, Jehu will put to death any who escaped the sword of Hazael. And Elisha will put to death any who escaped the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and all whose mouths have not kissed him. You remember what Elijah said earlier, right? I'm the only one left. And God said, not a chance. Elijah, in fact, there are 7,000 more people in Israel who have not bowed down to Baal that follow me. When you are trying to overcome depression, remember, you are not alone. God is with you, and we are with you. You aren't alone. There are people who will fight this battle with you. Don't go hide under a tree. Don't go get in a cave. And if you're in a cave, come on out of that cave and let us fight with you. We will love you. We will encourage you. We will pray for you. And we will help you achieve God's plan for your life. If you're struggling with depression, I want you to reach out to us this week. You can email us at pastors@firstandlar.com, and one of our pastors will reach out to you. And if you're currently dealing with depression, if you're currently in the fight, I want you to know I love you and I believe in you. I believe that God has amazing plans for your life. You may not be able to see it from your perspective right now, but God has a plan. You are not alone. Don't give up. Don't quit. Be obedient. Be faithful to the Lord. He will take care of you. He will deliver you. Get in his presence and trust him.